Hello and welcome to the first episode of Meet Me in the Mushroom, a new podcast which is devoted to exploring the psychedelic mushroom experience. My name is Stephanie Cohen, and I am your host today, although I am not the host of the podcast. Today I'm interviewing the host of the podcast, Cathy Coyle. She's here with me right now. But we thought that it might be nice for the inaugural episode to have Cathy share a little bit about her story so that her listeners can get to know how she came to be hosting Meet Me in the Mushroom and how she came to be working with the mushroom and what her background and philosophy is and what her vision for the podcast is. Cathy and I met because we're both on the board of a new website called awake.net, which is where this podcast will live. And awake.net is a new web portal that is dedicated to awakening in all of its forms, but particularly through entheogens. It's a place for the global entheogenic community to share wisdom about the psychedelic experience from all aspects, clinical, scientific, spiritual, religious, mystical. In short, we're trying to understand reality a little bit better. So I just wanted to introduce myself briefly. I'm a former journalist who lived in New York City and wrote for the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal, and I had what I guess you would call a spiritual emergency about 5 years ago when I realized that although I'd achieved the highest pinnacle of my career aspirations, a lifelong goal of mine, I was really pretty miserable. So, in grand fashion, I quit without any plan at all and found myself a few months later at an ayahuasca ceremony. And at noon on that day in 2015, I was a complete nihilist and cynic, pretty depressed, probably drinking too much. But by about 3 o'clock that day after I'd ingested my first cup of ayahuasca tea, I knew my life had totally changed. I suddenly felt connected to myself, to the universe, to the natural world, in a way that I never had before. These were things I just hadn't really thought about at all before. And it didn't all change that day, of course, but that began a path that I'm still on now. And now, 6 years later, I've worked with, I think it's safe to say, almost all the psychedelics out there, although maybe there's some that I'm missing, but mostly in a ceremonial context. And I found healers and shamans and community around the world who have taught me and helped me find my way onto a more spiritual, more connected path. And now I live a completely opposite life than the one I had in New York. Instead of going to opening nights and galas, now I live in the woods, and I can usually be found in front of my fire or walking in the forest. But I'm still a journalist at heart, and my soul's mission is to add to the conversation about psychedelics and their benefits for mental health treatment, for ending addiction, for bringing us into right relation with ourselves and each other and the earth, and ultimately waking humans up to the climate emergency that we're facing. I really believe in the power of these medicines to heal human beings when they are done in the proper way with the proper guidance, which brings me to Cathy, who does guide people in the proper way and helps her clients have amazing transformations. She is a Celtic medicine woman, a transpersonal coach and psychologist and breath worker who has studied extensively with the mushroom and is here to tell us about her experience today. So I just wanted to start, Cathy, by asking if there's anything else that you wanted to add to your vision for Meet Me in the Mushroom podcast.
First of all, thanks, Steph, so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me so that I can, I guess, share a little bit about myself and my journey, what's brought me to this point with the viewers that are going to be watching Meet Me in the Mushroom. So thank you. I'm really grateful for your time and your energy.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. So I guess you really hit everything, nail on the head right there with everything you said about Meet Me in the Mushroom and this beautiful platform that we are launching with awake.net and bringing a kind of a more whole conversation, I guess, to the psychedelic or the entheogenic movement by also creating space for the more mystical, psychospiritual, shamanic, all of those very magical elements of entheogen and the entheogenic experience. And the space that we're creating here with Meet Me in the Mushroom is to create create a space where we can have dialogue about just that. What are the divinely mystical, magical, fantastical experiences that people are having within mushroom space in particular with this podcast, and just finding a space to give a voice to that and give a voice to the more psycho-spiritual elements, because I think there's a big gap for that at the moment. So yeah, we're going to be exploring with lots of very interesting people over the next couple of months, everything from chaos magicians to clinical psychologists to medicine women. We've got a really diverse group of individuals that are going to be sharing their personal reflections of what it's like in the mushroom space.
Well, I'm really excited to listen to the rest of the series, but I am really thrilled to be able to talk to you about your shamanic path that's led you to this space now, because I know 15 years ago you never imagined that you would be leading people through mushroom journeys. So I just want to begin by asking you really if you could tell us the story of how you found this work and how you became initiated into this Celtic, or I don't know if you would say Gaelic, lineage of mushroom medicine women that you find yourself among now.
So I guess a good place to start is I recognize, or I identify, I guess, as Bandri. So Bandri is Oscuelga in Irish means female user of magic, or in its more base definition, it means female druid. But over centuries, over time, that term has evolved, and it would be used for healers, midwives, local wise women, seers, medicine women, priestess, a full embodiment, I guess, of that very definition, female user of magic. And so bringing back that identify and bringing back the practices of Bandri as a pathway for working with entheogens and working with healing and working with nature is, I guess, it's very close to my heart. It's something I'm very, very passionate about representing and reclaiming. And I think that's a really big word for this time. It's sort of reclaiming our Indigenous practices and reclaiming our identities, reclaiming our magic, and reclaiming our divine feminine essence.
And I know that you kind of came to this because you were, I think, working a lot with Western medicines to try to help a family member who was going through a crisis. And what you weren't able to find healing there, and sort of stumbled into working with entheogens to help this person, and saw firsthand what the power of these medicines were.
Yeah. So, yes, somebody quite close to me had gone through, again, spiritual emergency, as we would now identify it, but I guess the Western system didn't, to some degree still doesn't, but it is getting better, but definitely did not have the language or the awareness to understand that this was a extreme crisis of meaning and an extreme spiritual crisis. And you know, anybody that does any reading, if you read, you know, Groff's Stormy Search for Self, then you're going to really see that spiritual emergency is not a walk in a park. It is an extremely, extremely challenging breakdown of everything that you know, and your soul is just screaming out for assistance. And so I had someone very close to me who went through quite a profound breakdown, I guess you could say. And nothing was working. I mean, everything was tried. All of the traditional Western models of psychotherapeutic approaches, from talk therapy through, you know, medications, through everything you can think of, and there was no assistance. And it was getting to a point where we, you know, as a group of friends and as an extended family, we just really didn't know how to assist this person anymore. And it was around that time that I had my introduction to sort of psychonauting and experiencing the profound shifts of more recreational uses of LSD at the time for myself. And I had gone through quite a deep metamorphosis, and I thought to myself, there's something going on here with psychedelics for shifting mental process and shifting your sense of identity. And so I started doing a lot of research into psychedelic therapies, which were just emerging. It was like the psychedelic renaissance just around 2009, 2010. And so I recommended that this family member would maybe try some more spiritual shamanic ceremonies, and I saw a complete healing and transformation. And it was then that I knew that this was what I wanted to do with my own life, with the rest of my life.
And you had been, what's really interesting about your path is that you had been on a traditional you were going to become a psychologist with office hours and right. And then,
I mean, I completed my master's, and I was, I have my degree, I have my master's, and I was on the road to moving into a clinical doctorate. And luckily now I'm actually in the process of application for my PhD in transpersonal psychology. So there are roads for those that want to follow a more integrated spiritual path within psychology now, which is just incredible, really, that this is becoming more established. But at the time I was gung-ho, wanted to become a clinical psychologist, wanted to work with psychedelic medicines in a very therapeutic clinical space, and I completely immersed myself in learning everything that I could, from harm reduction to working with mentors in the States, from collaborating with people who are involved with MAPS. And that was kind of the pathway that I was forging forward.
what really struck me about your story when we first met at our first board meeting, and what made me feel like it would be really fun to interview you for your first podcast, is you mentioned that, the teachers that you found before there was the transpersonal program that you're applying to were, I mean, when you said I found a Druid man, a Druid priest who had worked with mushroom for many, many years, I was instantly very curious. So I know that you found a couple of people like that. I don't think I knew that there were Druid priests still anymore. So I'm really curious to hear about that training that you underwent. But I know he's not the only person that, you've apprenticed with. You found medicine men, I know, in Africa as well.
So it was interesting for me in Ireland because up until 2016, they have changed the laws subsequently, but you could pick wild mushrooms. I mean, I find it funny that wild mushrooms are illegal anywhere, but at the time, you could go to the mountains, you could pick your mushrooms legally and take them because it's a wild substance. But there was a change in the law back in 2016 where they added this to the controlled substances. So at the time, yes, I found a teacher in Ireland, and I was taken through various levels of initiation with wild medicine there, and very much a nature-based path, working. I mean, if I'm not sure if you know much about Druidry in general, but it's mainly based around working with the trees. I mean, the trees are the guides and the teachers, and it is an ancient nature-based path. The concept of Druidry in the modern age is obviously not going to be exactly what the Druids were practicing thousands of years ago, where we're piecing together elements of a tradition. But yeah, I was taken through quite an interesting journey there. And then I also had a teacher in South Africa who brought me through 3 years of initiation with the mushroom as a medicine.
I'm wondering if there's an experience. I mean, when you say initiation with the medicine, I'm not sure exactly what I conjure up, but I wonder if there's like a particular experience with one of these. I know you've told me some of them before, so but whatever strikes you as the most interesting of some sort of harrowing or perhaps they weren't harrowing. I don't know. Maybe they were just weren't mentally harrowing experiences that you had to go through in order to kind of be trained by these medicine men.
I guess, it's interesting because when I came to this, like I say, I was intending to work in a more therapeutic clinical setting, and I happened to attend a Santa Maria a sacred cannabis ceremony with breathwork, and during that ceremony, I received quite a clear message that even if I was planning to work in a clinical way, I needed to understand psilocybin. And I'd known for a couple of years that the medicine, even if it was a clinical route, it would be psilocybin. That was quite a clear message for me. And at this Santa Maria ceremony, I received another message about you need to sit with this medicine and learn from it. It will teach you. You will understand it from the inside, which I guess is another big debate that's coming up. Should therapists have undergone the medicine that they're facilitating? Is there a requirement for them to understand it intimately? And I felt that I really wanted to understand this intelligence on a very intimate level. And so my first teacher was actually the man that I came to in Africa, and the teacher in Ireland came a bit later. So I was already in initiation with the mushroom when I was connected to the man in Ireland that began to also train me there. And
You had moved to South Africa at some point for your own healing. I think you had sort of picked that as a Cape Town as a place that you knew would be helpful for your own psyche at that time in your life. So that's why you were in Africa.
yeah, I'm in Cape Town right now. I had moved to Cape Town a few years previous to the initiation, and I've been living between Ireland and South Africa for almost 11 years now. So that's just kind of how my life had been. And so I came to find a teacher in Africa who works with mushroom and who works on a very in a nature-based path, and he brought me through what I could never have expected that it was going to turn into, because I thought, I'm going to go sit with the mushroom and learn from it in this like cozy space in a room and I'm going to learn all of the secrets that I need to know for becoming, one with the medicine. But it turned into something completely other. And my initiation was basically, I don't know if you know much about how they work with mushroom in Mexico. So the Mexican curanderos, they work in the dark. They don't work with any music. They don't work with any light. They do work indoors generally, but they work submerged in darkness. And I was doing a lot of research, and that really resonated with me at the time about not having music, not having a blindfold, not having light. For some reason, I found that really interesting, and I could see that this was how it was being done in Mexico. And so when I started on this training, I guess, with my teacher here, the first journey we worked indoors, we worked inside, and he was, I think, evaluating my readiness to step into the next sort of layer of the way that he himself works with mushroom. And they call it soma here in South Africa. We refer to it as soma. So
It would be
I didn't realize that mushrooms grew in Africa.
yeah, they have a couple of strains. It grows everywhere. It is the largest living organism on the planet. So you're going to find probably a psychedelic mushroom anywhere you go. So when we got into the next level of work, it was very much, it was almost like a combination of the vision quest. So vision questing is something that is very dear to my heart, walking the red road and learning through commune with nature. So, staying in nature for a couple of days, fasting, being in the wild, being in the wilderness. These are sort of elements that I was already pursuing, And then it became this combination of fusing the visionary space of the mushroom with elements of what we would refer to as a vision quest. So being outside in nature, on the mountain, in the desert, in the dark, at night, moving, really, really being brought into very high level visionary states. And so as I started to move through this training, the teacher, which really was not either of these men. These men were there to hold space for me so that the mushroom could teach me, because the mushroom is my teacher. That is my ultimate teacher. That is my mentor. It is my guide. It shows me who I am. It shows me how to work with it, how it wants me to work with it. And yes, so from there it just evolved and it blossomed.
But you're out in the middle of the desert at night without having eaten and taking, taking you through these initiatory experiences. And were there moments where you were considering like, this isn't for me? I can't do this. It's too strong. I mean, were there moments where of fear and wanting to go be cozy somewhere?
I would say there were moments of extreme fear, but there was never a moment where I felt that this wasn't what I wanted to do. I've never experienced a sensation that I wanted it to stop or that I wanted to go somewhere cozy. For me, it was really interesting because it showed me a side of myself that I had no idea I possessed. I mean, what are the odds that I'm going to be exposed to that level of challenge in my cozy day-to-day Western life? It's unlikely unless I, seek it out. But it was scary, I won't lie. At the beginning, there were times, I mean, if you I'm slow to use the word shamanic because I think it's, there's a lot of connotations. There's going to be an entire podcast where we're going to be speaking about language and description and use of words such as shamanic or medicine woman, and just really getting into the layers of that. So that's another conversation. But for now, we will just work with the word shamanic. So in any shamanic initiation, you have layers. So you have the shamanic descent. So the descent into the underworld is part and parcel of any initiation. And I guess if I hadn't been able to withstand the descent and the fear and the visions and the extremity of that, then I wouldn't have been able to progress through the layers. And I mean, my teachers were amazing. They only pushed me as far as they safely felt I could be pushed initially. And then it was like, okay, you're going in now. You have to take responsibility for your own mind, for your own heart. And that's where I think you get really, really empowered, because you're starting to learn about fear, how to transcend fear, and working in heavier energies. And I think I mean, I'm writing a book at the moment, and one of the things that I was reflecting on was how, shamanic sickness, where there's often years of what we might call mental illness, is also the body breaks down, the mind breaks down, there's often a near-death experience, and these are the hallmarks of the initiate before they move into initiation. And I had all of these things from a very young age. I'd gone through a lot of challenges. And when I was in medicine, I realized that because I had withstood these extreme trials in life, then it made me a lot more resilient and a lot stronger within those very challenging medicine spaces. I think if I hadn't gone through those challenges within my day-to-day life or within my youth, then I probably wouldn't have been able to withstand what I was going through within the journey space.
And you were working with, I think, pretty high doses as well.
For my own work, my own training and initiation, I do work with higher doses, and that has been something that I have been put through, and that I take very, very select people through also. So yeah.
So what I find really interesting too about how you work and how a lot of I'm hearing a lot more stories along this line of people coming to the medicine path, but not necessarily studying, in South America or with some of the tribes that we tend to think of as shamanic, healing tribes. It's like you have sort of instead gone back to a Western shamanic, you know, style. There was a Western shamanic core that seems that has been
Yeah.
really forgotten and purposely covered up by religion, let's say.
Yeah.
But those teachings are there within the Druid church, within well, really within all of the religions. Within Judaism, there's these priests and teachers, and I really appreciate that you're kind of recovering some of those ways through your working in Ireland and working with the mushroom instead of working with something that wouldn't be indigenous to your country.
Yeah.
So if you could speak a little
Yeah.
bit about that, about why that was so important to you and how that sort of happened, that you managed to stay on a Western medicine path or find a Western medicine path at all.
Yeah, well, I think one thing just to sort of clarify is when we are working with medicine in Europe, we're unfortunately not working with it in Ireland, but I do non-medicine based retreats to Ireland, and then the medicine based work we're working out of beautiful forests in the Netherlands, we're working out of mountain spaces and coastal spaces in Portugal. So we're lucky that there are spaces where we can explore this way of working within Europe. But yeah, for me, you know, Shauna Holm is going to be a woman that's going to be on this podcast. I will be interviewing her soon, and she was a major mentor and influence in my development. And she also works within and identifies as Bandri and as a Celtic medicine woman. She also, I think, has some Norse lineage within her background. And I mean, if you look at the Norse for an example, it's one of the clearer systems that they've identified as an Indo-European shamanic tradition, in terms that it has elements that could be identified as shamanic, from deep visionary states, altered states of consciousness, shape shifting, working with animals. Like, all of it is there within the Norse pantheon. We also have a lot of those elements within Celtic shamanism, and Celtic shamanism is debated. I mean, some people say there is no evidence. Other people are, championing for it as a system. But what I do know is that we have a long lineage of witchcraft and working with plants and working with trees. So this is where labels get a little bit difficult. Things have to be put in all of these little boxes. But for me personally, when I sort of took a step back at it and I looked at everything, how I wanted to work as a guide, how I wanted to work as a woman, how I wanted to work with nature, then this is for me, it is a witchcraft path. And it's very much based around understanding the wise women, the cunning women, the poison paths of Europe. We have a really deep and strong lineage of this way of working all across Western Europe. And we have a vast array of medicines. I mean, not just, we have psilocybin, yes, we have psilocybin mushrooms all over Europe. We also have a variety of other plants that would have been used for entering into altered states, for thousands and thousands of years. So this is a really old tradition, and women who work with this type of healing, who work with altered states for healing and work with assisting others to tap into their divinity and tap into different layers of reality, I guess. It's as old as time itself.
So when you're reconstructing sort of that lineage, and your teacher is the mushroom, and I know that you do work really intensely with the vision quest state. Tell me, like, is it nature itself that's sort of teaching you how to, I mean, it's the mushroom and it's also the trees and being just within the natural world that's sort of teaching you how to guide people?
Yeah, there's so many elements just to how I work alone, and I guess the basic principle is coming back to nature, sitting in nature. I also, want to test people a little bit because any of the traditional rites of passage, any of the traditional rites of initiation, they weren't easy. You're in extreme weather conditions. It could be raining, it could be snowing, it could be hot. You want to sit with nature, and then nature is going to push you into your fasting. And this is just non-medicine based work. The level of insight and awareness that you can get, and also that sort of anchoring back to yourself and anchoring back to nature. I think that's what's really missing for people, and there's a huge learning within that. If you can safely create these types of spaces for people, then they can really go through a huge cataclysmic shift within self. So there's nature, there's learning how to sit with nature, how to immerse in nature, but also within the way that I work, breath work is a fundamental key. So in medicine or outside of medicine, I want to help you sort of understand how to navigate your experiences and push yourself through into different levels of states and awareness through just working with your breath. And another philosophy, I guess, that I have brought into my system, which is a Western system, is very much an Eastern philosophy of working with yoga. For me, that's the way it works. For others, it could be Qigong, it could be any body-based systems, because it's mind, body, spirit. So I really want to get you working with all of them. It could be dance also. We work a lot with dance and using dance to get into ecstatic states. So it's sort of this combination of varying principles to try to bring you back to some form of expression, primal expression.
And it sounds like one of the things you're trying to do with your clients is really get them into their bodies more, even though they're in these transpersonal states when they're on the mushroom. It sounds like you want them to understand, like, you live on Earth in a body, and that's what you need to be able to work with in order to make you peaceful. Is that true?
I'm all about the body. I'm embodiment. That's it. I want you embodied. I want you to experience highly, highly mystical states from a very embodied space. And I know we've had this conversation. I think it's probably very important to note that with the mushroom space, I'm not working with people that are coming for therapeutic functions. So somebody, say, with PTSD or any type of trauma or depression, I don't work with individuals who require that type of help. I would rather refer them onto somebody who's working with, there's, amazing people in the Netherlands working for more clinical functions. The types of people that are coming to me are individuals who are looking for more evolutionary, self-development, expansive spaces to explore who they are and to explore what is the nature of reality, what's the nature of their consciousness, how can they reconnect to a higher purpose, to a higher understanding. So it's very much psycho-spiritual development, but with that, I really want to assist people to becoming embodied with those higher energies and with that higher awareness. So an average retreat would be anywhere from 3 to 6 days, and during, say, a 3-day retreat, we're in nature. There's a variety of techniques used, from breathwork through to dance, and then we have journey if we're working in a journey retreat. But throughout those 3 days, I'm constantly bringing them back to their body. So even during the medicine, there's a lot of movement. We work with a lot of animal forms. I don't know if you know Ted Andrews' work. He's got amazing work on how to channel certain animals for tapping into certain elements of your archetype. And again, the archetype, so a lot of this is archetypical exploration, bringing people into medicine and exploring what sort of visions are they having, what kind of archetypes are they channeling in, or where is the visionary space taking them, and then allowing them to integrate that into their authentic self-expression in their day-to-day.
And so the intention really of what you're hoping that to sort of bring to your clients is working in these ecstatic states to deal with life in a body, and life with a personality, and life with DNA and karma and whatever's in our personalities that might be kind of causing us difficulty.
I think it's less that, it's more about excelling. That's the way I would see it. When people are coming, it's really about excelling in life. And people come, they work with me for a year and a half, and these are people who've done a lot of work. They've done a lot of psychospiritual work, they've done a lot of healing, they've spent years dealing with the more mental plane kind of stuff, like I have, and all of my team has. So now we're kind of working on a different trajectory. It's about, how do we get even better, how do we get stronger, how do we get more aligned, how do we have clearer self-expression, more authentic self-expression. And this is the type of space that the mushroom can also assist with. And I know I had a conversation with Kira Sherlock from the Irish Psychedelic Society, and we were chatting about the conversations around using mushroom medicine for people that are whole. So people that are really whole, that have done a lot of work, and they're looking to evolve and grow their life and their spirit and their expression of spirit, I guess, while on earth. And I think that's a really interesting conversation to have, because there's a lot of conversation around the psychotherapeutic benefits of mushroom, which we know are just incredible. But what happens to people that are wanting to use this to explore their spirituality, and what that means? What is their purpose? What is your purpose here?
So I guess I'm curious, and this is like a big question, but with working with these entheogens, and I'm curious about this for with a lot of people that work with them. Like, what is it that we're trying to do for humanity? Like, what do you think the mushroom itself is trying to teach us as humans? What is the goal? Like, for me, it was such a shortcut to better mental health, but also immediately, during my first ceremony, I was like, I communed with a tree, for some time, and I had never done that before. I mean, I grew up in a suburb that didn't have a lot of, it was a cute city with trees, but I wasn't, I had a little backyard with a little pool and stuff. I wasn't communing with the natural world at all. And then I lived in New York, and
Okay.
I never saw
Yeah.
much nature at all there. So it immediately like introduced itself to me. Like, I come from a vine that grows in the Amazon. This is a tree. Like, nice to meet you. It was really kind of that
Yeah.
experience. And so for me, it sort of was like a wake up to that. But what I'm curious about, these medicines have that ability to wake us up to many, many different dimensions and planes, including the natural world on this plane. And I wonder what you're hoping they're going to teach us as a human race, what you're guiding people through.
Yeah. I mean, that's first and foremost, it is that reconnection to nature. And we're here, we're on Earth. You said this earlier, we're on Earth, and this is our planet, this is our home. And even the more spiritually evolved we become, or the more highly mystical experiences we have, I think a really important thing is to not lose sight of our connection to the earth, and healing the earth, healing each other, rewilding the earth, just letting everything kind of come back to balance. And that's why the plants are here. They're here to assist us so that we can return, I think, to deeper commune with nature that we really have lost. And a huge thing is this level of disconnection. I mean, you've been through spiritual emergency, I've been through spiritual emergency. We were so disconnected, we were so alone, lonely, lost, isolated, filling our bodies up with things that just are toxic for our system. And the plants are just, they're present, they're eternal, their consciousness is eternal, they've been here for a very, very long time. The mycelium itself, the mushroom, I'm not sure if you've watched Star Trek, but the mycelium network. And this is a question I want to ask Paul Stamets, if I can get to speak to him. The mycelium itself, they're theorizing that it moves throughout the universal structure. So you've got access to this highway of information, and they're just there, they're just patiently waiting to show us nature has all of the answers. It can heal us in every possible way. And if we can come back a little bit from that disconnection, the plants are sort of our allies in reestablishing not just our connection to the natural world, but also our connection to divinity, to our own divinity, to the divinity of creation, to the divinity of each other, to the divinity of plant life, of animal life, of everything. And I think it's that opening of awareness, that opening of remembrance, that's their main function. I think that's why they're here to assist us, just to help us remember.
And in your own path, I mean, that's really, I want to go back a little bit to to sort of your origin story. I know that I think we're in the rave scene when you were younger, and that you were having these, just from previous conversations we've had, which I think is so interesting. You'd be like on the dance floor or whatever with people that were like feeling the music and having a beautiful night and feeling the unity consciousness and everything. But meanwhile, you're like transported. Can you kind of explain how that, because when you say remembering, it makes me sort of want to talk to you about what you're specifically remembering from your, I don't know what, your past lives, your DNA, I don't know what, but it's unlocking something really interesting within you.
So yeah, I mean, that was an interesting journey for me, because in my 20s I was a model. I lived all over the world. I lived in Paris and I lived in New York for a while, and it's more of it's more of a socialite kind of a life, and it's cocktail bars and nightclubs, and it was all very, very cool. But I ended up getting really, really sick, and I was getting more and more isolated from myself and more isolated from my path and my true nature, because of this world that I was living in that really just it wasn't nourishing me. It wasn't nourishing my soul. And so I got quite unwell. I had a spiritual emergency, which was accumulating into a spiritual emergency, and I thought I need to leave. So I left Europe, and that's how I found myself in South Africa. And I mean, here I wouldn't call it a rave scene. It's very different. They have really, really beautiful outdoor festivals here in just the most exquisite locations. I mean, you're talking about mountains and just dams that you can swim in. It's really, really beautiful, beautiful locations. And they have quite a vibrant psychedelic scene here. They've quite a vibrant music scene in this country. And that was where I was first introduced to psychedelics. But what started happening, I had a very big mystical spiritual experience the very first time that I took a psychotropic on a dance floor, but nothing that I thought was very unusual, but it was extremely mystical, and it completely transformed me. Now, these experiences didn't happen to me too often, because I quickly found I couldn't actually take these medicines in these environments, because of what I was experiencing was so very profound. And I was, with friends, and they were having amazing times, and they were having this unity consciousness and seeing beautiful patterns and beautiful colors and feeling merged with the music. And meanwhile, I was literally shape shifting into different beings. I remember the very first time that I had my first experience of shape shifting into a spirit guide, which is something that happens, if you read Eliad's Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, this is something that happens to shamans while they're in training on the mountain. And I was having this experience on a packed dance floor where I was dancing, and then I was simultaneously spider under the ground, and very, very physically so I was this spider. And when I tried to speak to my peers about this the next day, I was just met with these blank faces, and kind of just, they couldn't meet me. And that started to make me feel even more isolated, because I'm thinking, why is nobody else having these experiences? And I felt really lonely because there was nobody that could meet me where I was with the visionary experience that I was having. And from there, another time I had an extremely intense Kundalini activation, huge Kundalini opening, and then had a complete transportation from the desert, a dance floor in the desert in Africa, was completely transported to a forest in ancient Ireland where I was a druidic priestess, and I just started tapping into this memory of myself as a druidic priestess. And that, I think, was the moment that that the penny dropped, that there was something going on with me that was very unusual. And I really didn't know. I didn't have the words. I didn't have the understanding. It was very confusing for me. And now it all makes perfect sense. And it's something that I'm really passionate about, because I think that there are women and men probably all over the world that are having these high level visionary experiences, but they don't know where to go with it. And I think this is where, integration, and we're so lucky because this was 10 years ago. But nowadays there are more spaces, there are more circles, there are more women's groups and men's groups, and more people doing really good work that you can come for integration support. And more than likely, if you're having these high level visionary experiences and you find the right integration shamanic therapist, then you're probably going to find someone that can assist you on, moving into working with this type of energy that's probably quite accessible to you.
So, do you have any like, what is happening that so many people are having these memories of, I guess we would say, past lives of them being priestesses, working with the natural world in this way, working with medicines for healing, learning like the old techniques for I don't know, I guess divination, but also working with herbs and plants. I mean, these are like, a lot of people are having these experiences of needing to go back to those original teachings. And I'm curious if you have like a meta understanding of what's happening on Earth right now at this time, that these medicines are becoming so prevalent that you and I, who couldn't have been further from this world, are sitting here having this conversation because we're being like activated in this way. And like, what's happening? What do you think is happening here?
There's a combination of things. I mean, if you went back, and obviously now I'm just sort of theorizing here, but if you went back 200 years, then there were probably very few people in the world that were really working with higher level altered states. So, there was yogis in India, and you have your Native Americans, and there's just very distinct individuals within distinct cultures who were working with these very high energies, or these more transcendental states of awareness. And then something happened. I mean, we know that the church, sort of Christianity in and of itself, has done a lot of damage in many ways to sort of closing people down from accessing these types of teachings. And as well, they were kept quite separate. Like I say, they were in pockets of the world. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have that level of communication that we have now. And also, particularly in, Western Europe and in North America, once the Europeans kind of arrived there was a big push down on anything esoteric. It was really frowned upon. Nowadays, there is a lot more freedom. We have a lot more access to information. I do think that the tide is changing in terms of acceptance, because more people are meditating, more people are doing yoga, more people are really feeling the call back to nature. And as we increase in our numbers, I think that there is a sort of an increase in the morphogenic resonance of awareness. And it's like more people can kind of tap into it, because there's a greater number of us sharing, speaking, reading, researching, finding the teachers, teaching each other, remembering that we are the teachers that we seek as well, and kind of opening up that lineage of information within us. So I think it's a lot to do with the collective in and of itself is more awake now.
And I wonder, I wonder if every generation says this, and I'm always in that loop of like, are we different than the people in the 60s? Are we working in a smarter way? Where is this going? But it does lead me to ask, like, is there a shift in consciousness that's we're on the precipice of, or that's taking place now?
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, from where I'm sitting, yes, but I'm within my work, and I'm surrounded by other individuals who are on a very, very similar path. And all of my friends all across the world, we're all kind of working in a similar way. So within my reality, this is the reality. I'm in the reality of a shift in consciousness and an awakening. So that's just from my own sort of inner perspective and inner space.
And I'm wondering too, I mean, we kind of touched on this at the beginning of the conversation, and maybe this is a good place to kind of come back to, is within that shift and within the understanding of sort of what needs to happen in terms of climate change and, sort of changing changing what I guess, the precipice that we're kind of falling, like rolling towards right now, changing that timeline. What role the divine feminine and the sort of reclaiming of the matriarchy, or the feminine aspect of things, plays in all of this, because it's been such a patriarchal system for so long. And now with a lot of women working in this way and having these remembrances and kind of going back to the ancient teachings in which women did carry power, and the societies were more balanced in terms of the matriarchy and the patriarchy, like what role that has to play in everything that's happening now on earth, if you can follow that.
Yeah, I mean, balance is extremely necessary, and women gathering together, women sharing, women not feeling like we're competition for each other anymore, but we're kind of returning to a space, I guess, of sisterhood and, collective support and sharing of our capacities. That's where a lot of the healing is coming through, because we've been almost brought up to be, super competitive, super driven. I mean, being driven is not a bad thing. It's amazing. I have drive, and I want to have a career and make an impact and all of those things. But it's a lot of it has been how we've been taught, a lot of the language, and again, the separation. I think that's a really, really big thing. So as more women are stepping into this type of form of expression, and this is what we are, this is in our nature. I mean, we're wild, and we dance and we sing and we play and we create, and that beautiful force that we've been so deprived of. And I mean, we've been deprived of it. We have been burned and drowned, and all sorts of atrocities have happened to women throughout the centuries. They're still happening to women in certain parts of the world. So coming back into power. And I think a lot of our power is understanding that we are divine expression, everything from our menstruation and understanding the power of menstruation, understanding the power of birthing. And this is why a lot of the witches in traditional European witchcraft were midwives, because this is sort of like, we understand that the ability to birth and the ability to create life and bring life in is, it's part of the divine expression that we as women are an embodiment of. And I know if you do any research and you read about the Wu in ancient China, and these were some of the oldest shamanic traditions in the world, and the women were the shamans. These were the leaders in the mystical traditions, the leaders in understanding how to work with higher level energies. And I think as women, from what I gather from my team, because I have a beautifully, really balanced team of men and women that we work together, and we bring different factors into the spaces that we offer. And the men are the grounding force. They bring that structure, and that they can help us build, but we are the sort of the divine creative flow. And that's why we can move into sort of more trance states, and these higher level visionary states, I think, come very easy to women in general. So sort of reclaiming that, and it's really exciting. I mean, this is exciting work. It doesn't have to be woo woo. It doesn't have to be sort of new age either. It can just be genuinely, this is an expression of what it means to be a female.
It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful to think about where we could go with more women are starting to remember their divinity and remember that they are this portal between the spirit world and earth. Through their bodies, life comes, and if we could really shift into a more balanced place. And right now we're in such chaotic times, but you almost feel like that chaos is breaking open into order follows chaos. I mean, that's the pattern of things. So if we could find that divine connection, more of us, and sort of like understand that the greatest like joke that's been played on us of all time was telling us that God was in the sky, that God wasn't within. And that was something that has changed Western history for 2,000 years, and now it's starting a little bit to crumble through the use of these plants, through the shamans and the healers that are getting a lot more attention right now.
I think that's a really good point you just made as well, particularly in what's happening in the sort of psychedelic community and the psychedelic revolution. It's really important that we don't lose sight of the indigenous peoples that are working with medicines, of people who are working with medicines in more psychospiritual ways, because there's so much beautiful momentum, beautiful progress happening in the psychotherapeutic field. But we really need to honor, and this is why I'm so happy to be bringing this podcast to people, because we need to kind of keep that balance so that we don't lose sight of the mystical and move down this trajectory of sort of materialistic Western medical views of breaking everything down into separate sort of systems, and understand that these medicines are also portals of magic. There are mystical experiences, there is divinity, and there is divinity happening, and it is the divinity that is bringing the healing to these people, whether they're having it in a clinic or whether they're having it in an ayahuasca ceremony. The divine experience is what's making the difference.
Well, I'm so excited to hear from more of your speakers, and really like be guided through this really nascent field of working with these medicines by you, and learn more about what's happening. For me, being in America, I'm excited to learn more about what's happening in Europe and in Africa, and you talking to people that are working in the indigenous ways. And also, I know you're going to be talking to a whole spectrum of people that will really
Yeah.
help us like be guided in a healthy and effective way through what it's like to work with psychedelic states like this, and how to do it responsibly, and how to do it in a way that brings greater happiness to all of us. So I just wanted to thank you for letting me interview you on your first podcast.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been really, really fun, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, I'm excited to share more, and it's going to be super interesting to have all of these discussions and sharing and bringing information, I guess, on integration and preparation and ritualistic use and all of those wonderful, exciting things that we can share.
Well, thank you for remembering these old ways that you can then share with so many of us.
Yeah, we're trying. Thank you, Steph.
Mwah.